Hello there, history explorers. Welcome to another deep dive into the past, where today, we are about to encounter one of England's most revered monarchs. King Alfred the Great, a man of remarkable intellect, formidable resilience, and unmatched strategic genius. A man whose reign would become synonymous with the survival and transformation of England, ensuring that the country we recognize today could even come into being. But who was Alfred? What challenges did he face? And how did his leadership define an era of Anglo-Saxon resistance against the Viking onslaught? Join me as we journey back to the 9th century, to witness the life and times of Alfred the Great. To understand Alfred, one must first understand the world into which he was born. 9th century England was a far cry from the unified nation we think of today. Instead, it was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, each vying for power, each living in constant fear of external threat. Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia. These were the major players on the English stage, but their positions were increasingly fragile, their future increasingly uncertain. And looming above all was the Viking threat, a constant and terrifying presence. The Vikings were not simply marauders, they were settlers, conquerors, and annihilators of culture. Their invasions came with a brutality and speed that the fragmented Anglo-Saxon kingdoms could not easily repel. It was into this divided, embattled world that Alfred was born, in 849, the youngest son of King Ethelwulf of Wessex. Alfred was not born into greatness, nor was he ever expected to inherit the throne. The youngest of 5 sons, he was far from the line of succession. And yet, from a very young age, Alfred displayed an extraordinary intellect, a thirst for learning that would set him apart from his more martial brothers. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Alfred's education was not restricted to the battlefield. His father, Ethelwulf, ensured that his youngest son was well versed in both Latin and the teachings of the Church. At the age of 4, Alfred traveled to Rome, a pilgrimage that had both spiritual and political significance. He was received by Pope Leo IV, who reportedly anointed him as a future king. Such an act was symbolic, no doubt, but it was one that would foreshadow Alfred's eventual rise to power. However, before he could ascend the throne, Alfred would endure years of turmoil as his kingdom was thrown into disarray by the Viking onslaught. By the mid-9th century, the Vikings had transformed from mere raiders into full-fledged invaders. The so-called Great Heathen Army landed on English shores in 865, and their intentions were clear: they sought to conquer and settle, not merely to plunder. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell one by one under the might of the Viking assault. First Northumbria, then East Anglia, and then Mercia. It was Wessex, under the leadership of Alfred's elder brothers, that stood as the final bastion against complete Viking domination. In 871, Alfred's elder brother, King Ethelred of Wessex, died suddenly, leaving the kingdom in a perilous state. Alfred, at the age of 22, was thrust onto the throne, a reluctant king facing insurmountable odds. His reign began with a series of desperate battles against the Viking forces. The war was brutal, unrelenting, and it seemed at times that Wessex would succumb to the same fate as its neighbors. And yet, through all of this, Alfred emerged as a resilient and cunning leader. He understood that survival was not simply about military might, it was about strategy, patience, and adaptability. Unlike later medieval England, where kingship was firmly hereditary, Anglo-Saxon kings were chosen by a council of nobles and clerics known as the Witan. This assembly played a crucial role in ensuring that the most capable ruler, rather than simply the next in line, was placed on the throne. When Alfred's brother Ethelred died, many expected the Witan to choose Alfred's nephew, Ethelwald, as king. Ethelwald was the son of the late king and might have seemed the natural choice in a purely hereditary system. Yet the Witan made a different choice. They elected Alfred, recognizing in him a leader who could guide Wessex through its darkest hour. This was no small decision, and it reflected the faith that the noblemen and church leaders of Wessex had in Alfred's ability to defend the kingdom. However, this decision would not go uncontested. Ethelwald would later challenge the legitimacy of Alfred's line, leading to a conflict that would echo long after Alfred's reign. In 878, the Viking assault reached its most dangerous and terrifying peak. Under the leadership of Guthrum, the Danish forces launched a surprise attack on Alfred's court, forcing the king and a small band of loyal followers to flee into the swamps of Somerset. It was here, in the marshes of Athelney, that Alfred experienced his darkest hour. Isolated, outnumbered, and with his kingdom seemingly lost, Alfred was reduced to guerrilla warfare, launching hit-and-run attacks against the Danish invaders from the most remote parts of his territory. It was during this period of exile that the famous story of the burnt cakes originated. While staying in the house of a peasant woman, Alfred, deep in thought about the fate of his kingdom, neglected the simple task of watching over the bread in her oven, allowing it to burn. The woman, unaware that she was chastising her king, rebuked him for his carelessness. Whether true or not, this tale serves as a reminder that even kings, in their moments of despair, are not immune to the everyday concerns of life. But it was from these dire circumstances that Alfred would stage one of the most remarkable comebacks in history. In May 878, Alfred gathered what remained of his forces and confronted Guthrum's army at the Battle of Edington. The battle was fierce, with both sides fighting for the very survival of their people. Alfred's forces, fighting with the desperation of men defending their homeland, managed to break the Viking lines and secure a decisive victory. Guthrum, defeated and demoralized, retreated and was forced to negotiate a peace with Alfred. This peace was more than a simple cessation of hostilities. Alfred, ever the strategist, demanded that Guthrum convert to Christianity as part of the treaty. In doing so, he not only secured a symbolic victory but also ensured a long-lasting peace. Guthrum was baptized with Alfred as his godfather, a powerful image of reconciliation and dominance. It marked a turning point in the Viking Wars, and from that moment on, Wessex would no longer simply defend itself, it would begin to reshape England. It is here that we see one of Alfred's most forward-thinking contributions to England's future. The Viking threat was not simply confined to land, the seas were dominated by the longships that allowed them to strike anywhere along the coast with terrifying speed. Alfred understood that to truly protect his kingdom, he needed to meet the Vikings on their own terms, on the sea. And so, he began the process of building a fleet, what would later be seen as the precursor to the Royal Navy. Alfred's ships were designed to be larger, faster, and more maneuverable than the traditional Viking longships. His goal was to disrupt Viking supply lines, prevent further landings, and assert control over the English Channel. While his naval efforts were in their infancy and did not achieve immediate success, they laid the groundwork for a long-standing English naval tradition. Alfred, in this way, became the father of English sea power, and his foresight in recognizing the importance of naval defense would become one of the defining features of British military strength in the centuries to come. Though Alfred's navy may not have achieved immediate and total domination of the seas, it was the first glimmer of what would later evolve into the Royal Navy. His ships patrolled the English Channel, offering protection to the southern coastlines and creating a new dimension to the defense of Wessex. In this respect, Alfred is rightfully considered the founder of English naval power, understanding that control of the seas was key to the survival of his kingdom. Having secured his kingdom from immediate Viking conquest, Alfred's attention turned to more than just defense. He sought to build a better, more resilient society. Central to this vision was the construction of fortified towns, known as *burhs, which were strategically placed across Wessex. These *burhs were not merely military installations but thriving market centers, helping to stabilize trade and bring the kingdom's economy back from the brink. They were manned by local levies, ready to defend against any sudden Viking raids. But Alfred's vision for Wessex was not merely confined to walls and weapons. He believed in the power of law, culture, and education. Unlike other warrior kings, Alfred was deeply invested in the intellectual and spiritual life of his people. He believed that for his kingdom to thrive, it must have a strong foundation of law and learning. He set about codifying a legal system based on Christian principles, combining elements of earlier Saxon laws with his own reforms, making it accessible to his people. Alfred also understood the importance of education. He lamented the decline in learning since the Viking invasions, especially the knowledge of Latin, the language of the church and administration. To remedy this, Alfred invited scholars from across the Christian world to his court, encouraging them to translate essential works into Old English. His own personal commitment to learning was remarkable. He even began to study Latin in middle age. It was under Alfred that the first translations of works such as Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care * were made accessible to the common folk. In doing so, Alfred not only ensured the survival of learning in Wessex but helped to lay the intellectual foundations of the English nation. In understanding Alfred's reign, we must also consider the role of the Witan, the council of nobles and clergy who played a significant part in the governance of Anglo-Saxon England. The Witan was no mere advisory body. It held the power to elect kings, a system that set Anglo-Saxon kingship apart from the rigid hereditary successions of later medieval monarchies. The election of kings by the Witan reflected the importance of consensus among the kingdom's elite, and their decisions were not always dictated by bloodline alone. When Alfred's brother, Ethelred, died, the Witan faced a choice. While Alfred had a nephew, Ethelwald, who might have been a more traditional candidate, the Witan chose Alfred. It was a decision that spoke volumes about their confidence in Alfred's leadership and his ability to defend the kingdom against the Viking threat. However, this choice was not without its complications. Ethelwald, passed over by the Witan, would later rebel, challenging the legitimacy of Alfred's line in a conflict that would simmer throughout Alfred's reign and beyond. Nevertheless, Alfred's position as a king chosen for his abilities, rather than his bloodline alone, highlights the pragmatic nature of Anglo-Saxon politics, and the crucial role of the Witan in shaping the course of English history. Alfred's relationship with his nephew, Ethelwald, is a fascinating aspect of his reign that sheds light on the tensions inherent in a kingship based on election by the Witan. Ethelwald was the son of Alfred's older brother, King Ethelred, and, by some accounts, had a legitimate claim to the throne. But when Ethelred died, the Witan * chose Alfred, passing over Ethelwald entirely. This decision, while practical in the face of Viking invasions, did not sit well with Ethelwald. Ethelwald's discontent simmered throughout Alfred's reign, and after Alfred's death in 899, he made his move. Ethelwald seized control of the town of Wimborne, his father's burial place, and declared himself king, leading a rebellion against Alfred's son, Edward the Elder. This rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, underscored the fragility of the royal succession in this period. It also illustrated the unique tension between kinship and merit that defined Anglo-Saxon kingship. Ethelwald's challenge was not just a personal grievance but a reflection of the deeper uncertainties about kingship and legitimacy that persisted throughout Alfred's reign. Alfred died in 899, having ruled for nearly 30 years. His death marked the end of an era, but it also ushered in a new one, for Alfred had laid the groundwork for his successors. His son, Edward the Elder, inherited not just a throne, but a kingdom fortified by Alfred's reforms. Edward, like his father, would continue the fight against the Vikings, ultimately succeeding in uniting much of England under his rule. Alfred's legacy was not simply in his immediate successes but in the idea of kingship he had shaped. He had redefined what it meant to be a king, combining military prowess with intellectual and spiritual leadership. Alfred had not only defended Wessex but had also ensured that it could thrive, setting the stage for his descendants to continue the work of unification and nation-building. Edward, Athelstan, and the kings that followed would build on Alfred's foundations, creating the England we know today. Alfred's legacy has endured for over 1,000 years. Unlike so many monarchs whose names have faded into obscurity, Alfred is remembered as the Great, a title reserved for only the most extraordinary of rulers. He was not simply a king of Wessex, but a king of vision, a leader who recognized the importance of defense, law, culture, and education. His innovations, whether in the construction of the burghs, the codification of law, or the establishment of a fledgling navy, resonated far beyond his reign. He was a king who understood the complexities of leadership, who balanced military strategy with the nurturing of his kingdom's spiritual and intellectual life. Alfred's greatness lies in his ability to adapt, to innovate, and to inspire. He faced insurmountable odds, yet his resilience and foresight allowed him to not only defend his kingdom but to leave it stronger, more unified, and more resilient than ever before. His reign was a turning point in English history, and his influence can still be felt in the very fabric of British society today. Thank you for joining me, history explorers, on this journey through the remarkable life of Alfred the Great. His reign was one of triumph and transformation, shaping the course of English history for centuries to come. If you've enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth dives into the figures and events that have defined our world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring.